The first time the angel asked for blood, I felt relief before I felt fear, and that was my first failure. My name is Miguel. I have been a priest for 23 years, and for much of that time I was called to deal with what people avoid naming. I have entered houses where the air felt heavier than normal. I have heard voices that came from no throat, and I have seen people begging for help while something inside them smiled. Over time, I learned to stay calm. I learned to pray even when it seemed useless. And above all, I learned to persist. Or at least, I thought I had. The town where everything happened was small, quiet, and predictable. The kind of place where routine works like an invisible shield. Morning masses, shops opening early, the same conversations repeated on the same corners. At night, the streets emptied too quickly, and the loudest sound was usually the church bell marking the hours. I liked that. The silence helped me organize my thoughts, keep my faith steady, believe there was still order in the world. But a few months before everything changed, something began to slip out of that pattern. It wasn't all at once. It was gradual, almost imperceptible. Small events that on their own wouldn't draw attention. An accident that shouldn't have been avoided, but was. A fire that stopped before reaching a child's bedroom. A fight that ended before it even began, as if something had interfered at the last second. People started calling it a miracle. I did too, until I noticed what came after. There was always an after. On the same day a man escaped a road accident, a woman disappeared. No one saw her leave, no one heard anything strange, and within a few days, no one spoke about it anymore. Life went on as if that absence were just a detail. It happened again. Another time, a fire was contained inexplicably, and the next morning a homeless man vanished without a trace. Later, a robbery was avoided in an almost absurd way, and a young man disappeared that same night. There was always a silent exchange, as if something were balancing things in an invisible and cruel way. At first I tried to ignore it. The human mind seeks patterns even when they don't exist, and I wanted to believe that was all it was. But the more I observed, the clearer it became that this was not coincidence. And it was exactly during that period that my prayers changed. They stopped being expressions of gratitude and became insistent requests. I knelt every night and repeated the same words each time with more urgency. That the town be protected, that evil be driven away, that something be done. I didn't ask for signs. I didn't ask for explanations. I just wanted results. And I repeated it so many times that at some point, I stopped noticing the weight of those words. Until the night I received an answer. It was raining heavily, and the sound of water against the stained glass created a constant, almost hypnotic rhythm. The church was empty, as it usually was at that hour, and I was using the silence to organize some old records. That's when I smelled it. It wasn't faint or distant. It was strong, metallic, impossible to mistake. Blood. My body reacted before my mind. I stood up immediately and walked toward the corridor leading to the smaller chapel. With each step, the smell seemed to intensify, making the air denser, harder to breathe. When I reached the door, I noticed the light was on. I was sure I had turned it off. I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the doorknob, trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone had come in. Maybe I had forgotten the light. Maybe anything other than what I was about to see. I pushed the door open. He was standing in front of the altar, his back to me, completely still. He was tall, taller than anyone I had ever seen in there, and he wore something resembling a white robe. But it wasn't a clean white. There were irregular stains spread across the fabric, some dark and old, others still wet, as if they had been made recently. For a few seconds I just watched, trying to understand what was in front of me. Then I asked who he was. He answered without turning around, with a voice far too calm for that situation. He said I had taken too long. That caused immediate discomfort, as if he had been waiting for me far longer than made sense. I asked how he had gotten in, and only then did he turn around. His face was almost perfect, with features too balanced, as if drawn with excessive precision, but his eyes did not match that harmony. They were clear, even luminous, but had no depth. It was like looking at something that reflected light without absorbing anything. He smiled, and the smile took a little longer than it should to form. He said I had called him. I replied that I hadn't, that it wasn't possible, but he just tilted his head with a curious expression, as if dealing with a child who doesn't yet understand the obvious. He explained that every prayer asking for protection, every moment of desperation, every time I begged for intervention, opened space for him to come. I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer, if he was an angel. He didn't exactly say yes. He said he was what answered. At that moment, the smell of blood seemed stronger, and I noticed something I hadn't before. Small drops were falling from the hem of his garment, one after another, leaving dark marks on the chapel floor. I asked why he was there. He took a step toward me, and the sound was slightly wet, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my stomach turn. He said he was there to protect, but that protection requires exchange. He said it naturally, as if explaining something simple, inevitable. When I asked what kind of exchange, he looked directly at me and said he needed blood. At that moment, I tried to reject everything. I said that didn't come from God, that it made no sense, that it was wrong. He didn't argue. He just smiled again and asked if I really knew where things came from. Then he said he had already started, and in that instant, everything fell into place in my mind in a way I could no longer ignore. The accidents avoided, the people who disappeared, the feeling that something was keeping the town in balance. I asked how many people. He didn't answer. He just kept looking at me, and then he disappeared. There was no sound, no visible movement. He simply ceased to be there, as if he had never occupied that space. But the smell remained, heavy and unmistakable, clinging to the air as proof that it had been real. I stood alone in the chapel, staring at the altar, trying to find an explanation that didn't involve what I had just witnessed. And the more I thought, the more one idea became impossible to ignore. Something had answered my prayers, and now it expected me to keep asking. That night, I couldn't leave the church. I sat there for hours trying to reorganize my thoughts, as if it were possible to impose logic on something that clearly followed none. The smell of blood faded slowly, but never disappeared completely. It was as if it had seeped into the place, or into me. I tried to pray. I repeated words I had known since childhood, phrases that had always brought comfort. But this time, they seemed to reach nowhere. It was like speaking into an empty room, waiting for an answer that didn't come. Or worse, waiting for the wrong answer. When morning came, I had already made a decision. I needed to understand what was happening. I couldn't simply accept it as a divine manifestation, because something inside me already knew it wasn't. In the following days, I began to observe everything more closely. People continued their routines, seemingly calm, but there was something different in the details. Small absences, conversations cut short when I approached, glances that lingered too briefly. The town seemed to function normally, but there were gaps. Spaces where someone should be and was no longer, and no one seemed willing to fill those spaces. I started visiting some families who had recently lost someone. I used the pretext of offering comfort, of praying for the missing, but in truth, I was looking for answers. In every house, the same feeling repeated: restrained grief, unanswered questions, and a strange acceptance, as if the disappearance were something inevitable. One woman told me her husband had left for work and never returned. There was no noise, no witnesses, nothing to explain it. When I asked if he had enemies, problems, anything unusual, she just shook her head and said no. Then she thanked God because their son hadn't been home that day. That struck me in an unexpected way. Even in the face of loss, there was relief. And the pattern repeated. There was always something worse that could have happened, something that had been avoided. And somehow, that seemed to justify someone's disappearance. It was as if the entire town was accepting a trade, without realizing it. On the third night, I returned to the smaller chapel. I didn't know exactly what I would do if he appeared again, but I knew I had to confront him. Standing still, waiting, was no longer an option. This time, I didn't wait for the smell. I felt the presence first. It was a strange sensation, as if the air had grown denser, heavier. The candles flickered slightly, even without wind, and the silence deepened, almost suffocating. "You came back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I never left," he replied. The voice came from behind me. I turned immediately. He was closer than before. There was no safe distance between us. The details of his face were sharper, but that didn't make him more human. On the contrary, it made everything more disturbing. I asked what he really was. He didn't answer right away. He walked slowly through the chapel, as if observing the place, recognizing every detail. He ran his hand over the wooden bench, over the altar, like someone who had known that space for a long time. Then he said he was the answer I had accepted. That angered me more than it frightened me. I said I would never accept something like that it made no sense to call protection something that required death. He just looked at me with an almost patient expression, as if listening to a predictable complaint. He said people always die, with or without intervention. The difference, according to him, was that now there was purpose, order, control. Those words disturbed me deeply, because somewhere inside me, they made sense. And that was the most dangerous part. I insisted that it had to stop, that no matter the outcome, the method was wrong. That's when he did something that changed everything. He stepped closer and touched my chest. The contact was enough for something in my mind to open, like a door I didn't know existed. Memories began to surface, too fast to organize but clear enough to understand. I saw myself in moments of desperation, praying more intensely than ever. I saw myself asking for help, for intervention, for something to be done, without specifying how. And among those memories, there was something else, a presence. It wasn't visible, it had no defined form, but it was there. It always had been. Watching, waiting, growing with every request. Every moment I stopped seeking human answers and handed everything over to something greater. He said he had been there from the beginning, that I had made space, that every desperate prayer opened the way for him to become real. I tried to deny it, but the more I thought, the harder it became to sustain that denial. I remembered the words I had used, the way I had asked for quick solutions, for protection at any cost. I never said "at any cost" out loud, but somehow, that was exactly what I meant. He noticed when I understood, and he smiled. He said the town was safe, that the results were visible, that everything was working exactly as I had asked. He said all I had to do was continue, that it didn't take much, just a few sacrifices from time to time. People no one would look for insistently, lives the world would quickly forget. That filled me with immediate revulsion, but at the same time, it brought a doubt I didn't want to face. What if he was right? That question appeared in my mind silently, and stayed there. That was when I realized the true danger. It wasn't his presence. It was the possibility that I might agree. I took a deep breath and said I wouldn't do it again, that I wouldn't participate in any more exchanges. My voice came out firmer than I felt, but it was all I had in that moment. He watched me for a few seconds, without smiling, without overreacting, just analyzing. Then he asked how I intended to stop something that, according to him, never entered, because it had always been there. That sentence struck me differently, because for the first time I considered the possibility that he wasn't coming from outside. He was growing from within. I remained silent for a few seconds, trying to absorb that idea without letting it completely take over. The possibility that this wasn't an invasion, but an extension, changed everything. It wasn't about expelling something. It was about facing something that was already part of me. I asked what would happen if I simply stopped. He answered without hesitation. He said the balance would be broken, that everything that had been held back would return, and it would come all at once. It didn't sound like an empty threat. It sounded like a statement. I tried to argue that nothing justified it, that there was no acceptable exchange when the price was a life. He listened attentively, as if truly considering my words, but his reply came with the same unsettling calm. He said I was confusing justice with comfort, that I wanted to believe in a world where everything resolves without cost, but that such a world had never existed. According to him, the only difference now was that the cost was being paid in an organized way. That enraged me, but also left me without an immediate answer. Because in many moments of my life I had seen people suffer without reason, without logic, without any kind of compensation. I had seen injustices that were never corrected, losses that never made sense, and for the first time, there was something that seemed to offer an explanation, however cruel. I shook my head, trying to push that thought away before it took root. I said that no matter what he argued, I would not continue, that I would rather deal with chaos than accept that. He watched me for a few moments, then asked if I truly believed I could bear the consequences of that choice. Before I could answer, he approached again. This time, he didn't touch my chest. He touched my head, and everything became clearer than I wanted. The memories that had come before, fragmented, now organized themselves. Situations I had filed away as difficult cases began to take on a different shape. People I couldn't save, circumstances in which I simply accepted the outcome. Moments when I said I did what I could, but I didn't do everything. There were times I stopped too soon, times I didn't want to go deeper, times I preferred to believe there was nothing more to be done. And in each of those situations, something continued after me. I didn't see it, I didn't want to see it. But now I understood. This had been happening for a long time, not with the same clarity, not with the same presence, but the pattern had always been there. Small miracles followed by silent losses. Outcomes I accepted without question because they were easier to accept. I had always believed God was acting, but there was never an answer, only consequence. I fell to my knees without realizing it. The weight of it was immediate. I asked how many times. He didn't give a number. He only said enough that I could no longer consider myself innocent. The way he said it wasn't accusatory, it was almost gentle, and that was even worse. I looked up at him, trying to find some sign that this could still be reversed. Some opening, some weakness, anything that would allow me to regain control of the situation. I asked what he wanted now. He said nothing had changed, that all I had to do was continue, that I already knew how it worked. That made me realize something important. He wasn't forcing me, he was convincing me, and that made everything more dangerous. I took a deep breath and, with what little firmness I had left, said I would not be part of it anymore. That no matter what happened, I would not allow it to continue through me. This time, he didn't smile. His expression went blank for a few seconds, as if evaluating a possibility he hadn't fully considered. Then he said that if I didn't choose, the choice would still be made. I asked what he meant by that. He didn't answer directly. He just turned his face toward the chapel door, as if looking at something beyond the church walls. He said there had always been a next one, someone who filled the necessary role to maintain balance. And then he added something that made my entire body tense. He said that this time, it wouldn't be someone easy to ignore. I felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with fear of the unknown. It was something more specific, more directed. I asked who. He looked back at me, and for the first time, there was something close to intention in his gaze. It wasn't curiosity nor patience. It was expectation. He said I needed to see for myself, and then he disappeared again, in the same silent way as before. I was left alone in the chapel, but this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with a certainty I couldn't shake. Something had already been chosen. Something was already in motion. I left the church in a hurry, my heart beating irregularly. The streets were empty as always at that hour, but there was a different feeling in the air, as if the town were suspended, waiting for something to happen. As I walked, I realized my steps were taking me somewhere specific even if I didn't want to admit it. I already knew, even before seeing it. When I turned the last corner, the lights were on, the door half open, and the silence. Too heavy to be normal. It was my sister's house. My body froze before I even realized I had stopped walking. I stood there for a few seconds in the middle of the street, staring at the half-open door, trying to convince myself there was a simple explanation. Maybe she had left in a hurry. Maybe someone had forgotten to close it. Maybe I was letting fear distort everything. But the silence didn't help. It was a wrong silence. My sister's house was never that quiet. There was always some sound, even if subtle. The creak of furniture, the echo of the television, soft footsteps in the hallway. She hated absolute silence. I took the first step toward the house with my heart tight, as if every movement confirmed something I still didn't want to accept. I pushed the door slowly and called her name, trying to keep my voice steady. No one answered. I stepped inside. The air was colder than it should be. It wasn't just physical. It came from within, like a warning. I walked through the living room and noticed everything was in place, organized as always. No sign of struggle, nothing out of place. That scared me more than any mess would have. "Clara?" I called again. Nothing. I continued down the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Each step felt heavier, as if the floor resisted. When I reached her door, I smelled it again. Iron. Fainter than in the church. But there. I pushed the door open, and she was there, sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to me, completely still. For a second, I felt such a strong relief that I almost ignored everything else. I took 2 quick steps into the room, calling her again. She didn't answer. That's when I noticed. Her breathing was irregular, too slow, as if something were interfering with its natural rhythm. "Clara," I said, moving closer. She began to turn her head, slowly. When I finally saw her eyes, the world around me seemed to lose meaning for a moment. They weren't her eyes. There was something there, something I recognized. It wasn't the same presence as in the chapel, but it was connected, like a weaker reflection, an extension. "Miguel," she said softly. But it wasn't her voice. There was weight behind the words, something that didn't belong to her. "What's happening?" I asked, trying to control the panic. She tilted her head slightly, repeating a gesture I had seen before. "You took too long." My stomach dropped. The same phrase. Exactly the same. "No," I murmured, stepping back. She smiled. And it was worse than anything I had seen before, because the smile still carried traces of her. It wasn't entirely foreign. It was a mixture, something that shouldn't exist. "He said you would come," she continued. My breathing grew heavy. "He is here?" She didn't answer directly. She just placed her hand on her chest, pressing hard, as if something were inside her. "He's closer than you think." My entire body reacted. "Get out of her," I said, trying to stay in control. "You still think you can separate things," she replied, disturbingly calm. I took another step back, trying to process what was happening. "This has nothing to do with her. It has everything to do with you." The words came firmer this time, and for a moment her expression changed. There was a flicker of awareness, an effort, as if she were trying to surface. "Miguel," she said, almost in her own voice. "Don't let—" The sentence was cut off. Her body stiffened for a second, then relaxed again. The smile returned. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "Feel what?" She stood up slowly, her movements too controlled to be natural. "That this didn't start today." My heart raced. "That you've been here before." That hit me hard. Fragmented memories began to surface again. Moments when I had been in that house during difficult situations, praying, trying to help. Situations I had always considered resolved. Now, I wasn't so sure. "That's a lie," I said, without conviction. She stepped closer. "You always chose to protect," she said, "even when you didn't know what you were protecting." The words echoed in my mind. Protect. It had always been that. "And now?" she asked. "Will you protect again?" I felt a weight in my chest as if something were pressing from the inside out. "Not like this." She stopped a few steps away. "Then choose another way." Silence settled between us, but it wasn't empty. It was waiting. "What happens to her?" I finally asked. She didn't look away. "That depends on you." My whole body tensed. "Depends how?" She took a deep breath, and for a brief moment her expression wavered again, as if she were fighting. "He needs to continue," she said with effort. "Or everything comes back." "What everything?" "Everything you've held back so far." The air seemed to vanish from the room. "You don't understand how big this is," she continued. "You don't understand what you'll release." The words were no longer entirely hers, nor entirely that thing's. It was an unstable mixture, and that made it all more real. "Give me another option," I said. She smiled faintly. "There's always another option." My heart tightened. "What?" She looked at me for a few seconds before answering. "You." The world seemed to stop. "No." "Yes." The word came with a firmness that left no doubt. "He started in you," she continued. "Grew in you." I stepped back, feeling my body weaken. "Then he ends in you." My breathing became uneven. "You want me to?" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Because I understood. If I stopped, if I broke the cycle, the price would be mine. And in that moment, something inside me finally became clear. It was never about choosing who would die. It was always about postponing the final choice. And now, there was no way to postpone it anymore. Clara stared at me with that impossible mix of presence and absence, waiting. And for the first time since it all began, the decision was truly mine. I stood there looking at her, trying to find any alternative that didn't lead to that choice. But there wasn't one. Not in her eyes, not in the silence of the house, not inside me. For the first time, everything was too clear. I had spent my life believing my role was to protect others, to ask for help when things got out of control. I always thought that, in the end, there was something greater that would take over the rest. But now I saw what really happened when I said, do something without understanding the cost. Someone always paid. And all this time, I just didn't want to know who. Clara took a step toward me. The movement was slow, heavy, as if her own body resisted. For a moment, her eyes returned to normal. "You already know," she said, barely holding on. "I know." I looked around the room, trying to delay the inevitable. Every detail seemed more vivid than ever. The curtain moving with the wind, the faint light entering through the window, the metallic smell still in the air. It didn't feel real, but it was. "If I do nothing," I began. "He continues," she answered. "And if I do?" She hesitated, breathing with difficulty. Then he stops. The silence that followed was final. I stepped closer slowly. Each step felt harder than the last, as if something inside me still tried to pull back. When I stood in front of her, I noticed she was trembling too. "Miguel," she said with a thread of voice. "Don't let him stay." That decided everything. I placed my hands on her shoulders, holding gently at first, as if there were still a simpler way. But there wasn't. I knew it. She knew it too. For a moment, we stood still, looking at each other, as if that were the last moment in which there was still a choice. Then I tightened my grip. She reacted at first, not violently, but with a natural reflex, trying to pull away, her hands touched mine, and for a second I felt I could still stop. There was still time, and that was exactly what made it harder. I closed my eyes and continued. The resistance slowly faded. Her body, which had tried to remain firm, began to give in. The movement of her hands lost strength. Her weight shifted until everything went still. I remained there for a few seconds, as if time had stopped with her. When I finally let go, the room felt different. There was no longer that sensation of something watching. No presence, no weight in the air, just silence. A real silence, empty, without expectation. I stepped back, breathing heavily, trying to understand what had changed. I looked at her. There was nothing left but her. No strange gaze, no influence, none of that. The metallic smell faded slowly, as if it had never existed. The air felt lighter, but that didn't bring relief. It only made everything more final. I moved away slowly, my body heavy, as if every movement required more effort than it should. Before leaving the room, I paused for a moment, but I didn't have the courage to look again. I already knew what I would see. I left the house in silence. The streets were still empty, as always at that hour, but something had changed. It was no longer a waiting nor a hidden tension. It was just the town returning to what it had always been. Imperfect. In the following days, it became clear. Small problems began to return. Arguments, accidents, situations that previously seemed narrowly avoided. Nothing immediate, nothing extreme, but enough to show that balance no longer existed. People began to complain again, to question, to seek explanations. And no one knew what had really been interrupted. No one mentioned the missing. No one connected the events. The town simply moved on. I remained in the church. I continued hearing confessions, conducting masses, repeating gestures I had performed my entire life. On the outside, nothing changed. But inside, there was no longer any room for doubt. My prayers changed too. I still pray. But I no longer ask for intervention. I no longer ask for answers. Because now I know what can answer. Sometimes at night, when everything is silent, I feel something strange. It's not a presence, nor a voice. It's more subtle than that. It's a memory, as if part of me is still waiting for that moment when something answers. And sometimes when I spend too long looking in the mirror, I get the impression that my reflection takes a little longer to follow me, as if it's still deciding whether it's worth answering again.